This week on the Writers Detective Bureau, late nights, cell phone data, and high-tech crime. I'm Adam Richardson, and this is the Writers Detective Bureau. This is episode number 36 of the Writers Detective Bureau, the podcast dedicated to helping authors and screenwriters write professional quality, crime-related fiction. I want to thank Gold Shield patron Deborah Dunbar from deborah.dunbar.com and CC Jameson from ccjameson.com for becoming my latest Gold Shield patron. Also, big thanks to my latest Coffee Club patrons, Daniel Miller, Natalie Marin, and Rick Sim, and also to Jean DesRochers for upping his monthly pledge, and all of my other patrons supporting me each month. I am so grateful for you, and I'm going to break up these callouts from week to week because 22 of you are now supporting this podcast, and that is a lot of names, but I am truly grateful. So if you want to read stories by authors that are doing their investigations homework, check out the show notes at writersdetective.com/36 to see a list of them. Those are the ones that are keeping the lights on in the Bureau. And when you create things for free, and you have people that appreciate those creations so much that they want to give you a little something in return, I think that is a great barometer for measuring how well you are serving your audience. And I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about you and your creations, your stories, your worlds, the tales that you're creating for others to escape into. They really appreciate your work as a storyteller, which is why I really believe you should consider starting a Patreon account. You can learn more by visiting writersdetective.com/Patreon, and that's Patreon. Dan Smith asked a great question on Facebook. Dan said, "It seems that television detectives work late into the night if they're on a case. Before I write something like that and make myself look foolish, is that how it really goes? Meaning, if you're on a case, are you working until the case is solved? Or are you still keeping regular-ish hours?" You won't look foolish, Dan, if we're talking about a homicide or a kidnapping. If there are leads in a murder investigation or a righteous kidnap case, we are definitely going to work ourselves into exhaustion. On more than one occasion, I have put 26 hours in one day on my time card, much to the chagrin of my payroll office. But there's a reason why there's a TV show called The First 48. The statistics of solving a homicide are much higher if you can do so within those first 48 hours. Evidence is still in play. People are still around that know something, they saw something, heard something, or they're hiding something. That stuff is still around in that first 48 hours, which is why it's so key. Now, most other cases are still going to be worked during normal business hours or whatever shift your unit works. Some larger agencies may have night detectives, detectives that work a night shift. The surveillance-based units like narcotics or Vice or some sort of street team will work different schedules because that's when people are out on the street. But all of these, even if it's nighttime, are going to be part of their regular workday, not necessarily overtime like it would be on a homicide case that just broke that goes all through the night. And I've worked homicides that had so many moving parts and leads to follow up on that it was clear that this was going to be an all-hands kind of case. And when these cases happen, the detective sergeant, remember that's a supervisory position, may send some folks home after that initial run to exhaustion to get some sleep. And they'll call in others to take over chasing those leads in support. I guess what I'm trying to say is you can't sustain an investigation on no sleep. So the detective sergeant may create a shift schedule, a temporary one, to run the investigative team around the clock in a much more sustainable way. Well, a good detective sergeant will do that, at least. Thank you for the question, Dan. Our next question also comes from the Facebook group. Bella Elwood Clayton asked a question regarding her story, part of which included a bit about a text message on a cell phone. And I wanted to delve a little deeper into the topic of how the police can compel companies to assist with investigations, and then why sometimes it doesn't work. We've talked quite a bit on this podcast about probable cause and search warrants, but what happens when a third party, like a technology company, may not actually possess the evidence that we, the police, are looking for, where the company is the only one, rather than the suspect, that has access to the device, even though they don't necessarily have it in their possession. So in this situation, we in law enforcement can get a court order, which may not be technically a search warrant, signed by a judge that compels the company to assist us in our investigation. But in the last few years, we've had many issues with companies in the technology sector intentionally resisting helping law enforcement. Not to the point of being in contempt, but in the way that they're designing their products now. So I like to call this the Snowden effect. Regardless of whether you think Edward Snowden was a whistleblowing privacy advocate or a traitor to his country, the revelation that spying agencies of the United States had compromised much of the technology industry without any kind of due process had a chilling effect on how we in law enforcement do our jobs. It's important to recognize that spies and cops are two very different things. Cops use the rule of law to conduct business. We present probable cause. We get court orders and search warrants. We have to explain in an open court where evidence came from and prove that we obtained it legally. Spying, in its inherent nature, is covert and secret. We may have similar goals in protecting our nation from similar or the same enemies, but we have vastly different rules of engagement. Some might argue that spies have no rules, yet law enforcement is quite literally the enforcement of rules. That's what our name is. So the problem is that the tech industry, feeling victimized by the spying agencies, they view government as one big giant entity, which it kind of is. But to them, there is no difference between the CIA and NSA and the FBI or LAPD. Up until Snowden's disclosure of info in 2013, tech companies complied with laws such as CalEPCA, which is the California Electronic Communications Privacy Act, or CALEA, which is Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, and then also the All Writs Act of 1789. Yes, I did say the year 1789. Okay, so technically it's a modernized version, which is Title 18 U.S. Code Section 1651, but more commonly known as the All Writs Act. So let's go back real quick. In 2012 or 2013, if I had probable cause, I could get a judge to order Apple to extract data from my suspect's iPhone. And then I could use that data as evidence in court, right? So in 2014, Apple released iOS 8 and the iPhone 6. Now, nowhere on the Wikipedia page for iOS 8 does it mention this, but that is when Apple made the design decision to encrypt the devices and not keep the encryption keys themselves. Essentially, they intentionally lock themselves out of the devices they sell. So why did they do this? Because the courts can't compel the company to assist law enforcement if they don't have the technical ability. So remember, Snowden's event was in 2013, and then the very following year, 2014, was when iOS 8 was released, locking the keys inside the phone. When the terror attack occurred in San Bernardino, California in 2015, the FBI sought a court order under that All Writs Act to compel Apple to unlock the phones of the now dead terrorists and extract data from them, which is an important investigative step in determining if other co-conspirators exist or disrupting other terror plots that were about to unfold that were tied to these same people. So the problem was that Apple declined to help them, and they sought to fight that court order. A March 2016 hearing date was set where a federal court would hear whether or not it was unreasonable to order Apple to create new technology to unlock this phone. The creation of new technology is key in this case, as previous writs by the FBI and police departments sought to compel Apple to use, quote, its existing technologies, end quote. Apple engineered their way out of having any existing technologies to use for unlocking and extracting data from any phones running iOS 8 or later. But that hearing never happened, as the FBI was able to use a third-party company to unlock the phone, and then they ended up withdrawing their request for the court order. So as it stands today, Apple does not unlock iOS devices running iOS 8 or later because they engineered it that way. If your antagonist photographs his murder scene using his modern iPhone or stores his child porn on there, Apple will not help your protagonist get that data back out of the phone. And because I know you, and I'm going to answer this before you ask, yes, I do use iPhones, iPads, and Macs. To see what Apple will help with and won't help with, I will include their guide to law enforcement in the show notes, which you can find at writersdetective.com/36. So scroll through there and take a look at what is and what is not encrypted, or what your protagonist will be able to get with a search warrant or a court order. This week's last question comes from my latest Gold Shield patron, CC Jameson from ccjameson.com. And she writes, I remembered you talking about Tor and the dark web in an earlier episode, but I was wondering what kind of access a U.S. city detective would have to it. Are there some sort of web intelligence specialists, cops, or possibly civilians at the city level who would have a computer that can connect to the dark web? I assume such computer would have to be disconnected from any kind of network where police data is stored. So I'm not sure if cops have access to Tor. For example, in any cases of human trafficking, do certain cops see things on the dark web? Do they have a special computer that can connect to it so they can browse and possibly try to impersonate a buyer or something like that? Is that something that local police hire out to IT hacker specialists? Or is it something only the FBI or other federal agencies handle? Great question, CC. And the short answer to all of that is yes. Many local agencies do have access to the internet for investigative purposes. And we call them cold computers because, in theory, they aren't easily traceable back to the department. I don't want to reveal too many of our methods for obvious reasons, but let's just say that any plausible way you, as an author, can think of for how you'd set up your own cold computer for investigations to work these cases would probably be pretty accurate. There are high-tech crime investigators at the local, state, and federal level all across the country. Some agencies may have one investigator that handles high-tech stuff in addition to a regular detective caseload, whereas others may have a dedicated high-tech crime unit with several detectives. The bread and butter work of these investigators is usually the forensic searching of computer hard drives or unlocked cell phones. However, they may also work the online undercover side of things as well. Or if they don't do that, they will at least assist other undercover detectives with the technology aspect of these kind of investigations. Some agencies will proactively search for pedophiles and drug dealers located within their jurisdiction. But more often than not, local agencies become involved in these cases of one of two primary ways. The first way is that an RP, or a reporting party, an RP reports to the police that they believe a crime is occurring online. Like, I found child porn on my boyfriend's computer, or someone arrested for drugs decides to become an informant, and he tells his would-be handler, the narcotics detective, hey, I bought my Molly through Silk Road on Tor. So this is the first kind of local case that starts with a local connection in the real world that leads investigators into the digital world. So the second way we get involved in these kind of cases is we're contacted by another agency to assist in their investigation. So we're brought in to handle the local aspect of a case in another jurisdiction. If NYPD launches an investigation in the same way I described at first, that the girlfriend finding child porn on the boyfriend's computer happens in New York, and the NYPD gets a search warrant for the computer or their internet service provider records or whatever, something where the NYPD investigation leads to a suspect in my local area, the NYPD may reach out to my high-tech crime unit in Southern California to arrest the guy or to serve a search warrant on his residence to get the computer, or maybe set up a proactive sting operation where we have an undercover detective posing as a child online in a chat room or a message board, or maybe they're having the undercover pose as a child porn purchaser. And then we fully document the interaction or transaction. But that second way is where it starts with another agency bringing us the local half to the case. Now, there are obviously pitfalls to avoid when we're talking about those proactive investigations. But these kind of operations are hugely beneficial when it comes to presenting all of that fully documented evidence to a jury. Now, one of the pitfalls to avoid in one of these proactive investigations is the concept of entrapment. Now, this is something that's often misunderstood. Entrapment is when the police induce or coerce someone into committing a crime they wouldn't normally commit. And that really means that the police planted the seed of committing the crime. Posing as a drug buyer and asking a suspected drug dealer, hey man, how much? That's not entrapment. Posing as a drug buyer and asking a bystander on the street, hey, will you go buy some cocaine for me? I'll pay you $100 to score some for me right now. That's entrapment, because you're enticing, inducing, or coercing someone into something they had no intention of doing until you planted that seed. And especially if you're providing an enticement like that quick and easy $100 to commit the crime. So in the case of high-tech crime, just like the drug deal, your undercover investigators have to be careful not to insinuate anything that could be considered entrapment. There are some specific techniques we use to avoid entrapment issues, but I really don't want to go into them. I don't want to reveal them here because I want those techniques to keep working, so we can keep child predators in prison where they belong. Anyway, not all agencies will have cold computers or high-tech crime investigators. So a lot of jurisdictions will get help from high-technology task forces that are often funded and run by the U.S. Secret Service. I should mention that many federal task forces will participate, run, or fund their own high-tech crime units and task forces, but the Secret Service has that high-technology crime mandate, and they operate task forces all over the country where the members of the task force are U.S. Secret Service special agents, and then they will also include state and local detectives, and they'll all work in one lab together. Another version of this task force concept for high-tech crime that you may have heard about, probably from Dateline NBC, is the Innocent Images National Initiative. Innocent Images is an anti-child porn initiative it's a task force between the FBI, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and then also some state and local high-tech crime investigators. And high-tech crime investigation is actually a really lucrative field to get into as a detective because you can have an entire second career in the private sector once you retire from law enforcement. I should also mention that the HTCIA, which is the High Technology Crime Investigators Association, is a worldwide organization of public and private sector high-tech crime investigators. And they are very active in collaborating together when it comes to tactics and techniques, especially with regard to the uber technical stuff that goes way over my own propeller head. Imagine having this as your job. I mean, it's not like Microsoft has a support desk for imaging a suspect's encrypted hard drive, So the HTCIA folks really do help one another out in a group think kind of forum. So if your detective protagonist gets stuck with a technical issue on the computer stuff, even if he or she is not experienced, they're going to have backup in the form of other experienced HTCIA members around the world that will provide suggestions and help based on experience with similar issues. And they're literally only an email or a computer discussion forum away. And I will include links in the show notes to more information about the Innocent Images National Initiative and the HTCIA. And also, be sure to check out CC Jameson's website at ccjameson.com. Thank you so much, CC, for the question. I really appreciate it. That's a wrap for this week. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Writers Detective Bureau podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you haven't done it yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It's totally free, and the episodes will pop up in your phone every week. Keep those questions coming. This podcast is created for you, and it's created out of your questions. So please send me the questions. I would be happy to answer them, or tell me if you're going to 20 Books Vegas. Reach me at writersdetective.com/podcast. Just fill out the form, and I would be happy to get your question answered on the air, or at least send you a note right back. So thank you so much for listening. Have a great week and write well.